share screen because I made PowerPoints. Because of course I did. Take the girl out of corporate. Can't take the corporate out of the girl. All right. So this is our agenda for tonight. We're going to talk kind of at a high level about just how do we take care of ourselves? How do we lose weight? And then I do want to answer the kind of clickbaity question that I asked in my marketing. Is vinegar the secret to weight loss? And of course, it's probably not the secret, but it could be a secret that could be helpful. So I will let you know what I know about that. And then, of course, for those who want more support, I will have a little moment at the end, a little commercial at the end. But that's what I plan on covering tonight. So y'all know me, but for anybody who's watching the replay or who joins in as I'm going through this, I am a certified life and weight coach through the Life Coach School, which, you know, obviously I'm biased, but I have done a couple of other coach training programs, and that one was by far superior to anything else I have done in terms of strictly coach training. And as a result of going through that training material, I ended up losing 50 pounds in 2020 at age 46. And I was already coaching. I already had a desire to help people in exchange for cash, right? Make it a business. This does create some expenses. Just, you know, having the paid webinar account is an expense. So, I was already coaching as a business, but after the weight loss, and especially because that happened in 2020 when it did. So I was out and about, I weighed over 200 pounds. I worked from home for several months. And when I came out, everybody here said, what are you doing? What's going on? So that's how my focus really became weight loss. And that's when I founded the 16-week program called Weight University. And as y'all know, I do back that with a guarantee. So I want people to feel comfortable giving it a try. And if anybody wants to see, I do have some client testimonial videos. lisaduke.net/testimonial will let you see those out on my YouTube channel. I have a playlist of them. All right, so let's talk about just how do we take care of ourselves? Again, kind of zooming out, getting a little bit of the philosophy behind this. So I like to joke that we are basically emotionally complicated houseplants, right? And I'm not much of a gardener, which is worrying for my self-care, but I did some Googling, and this Gardener's Path website, how to take care of houseplants. It says all plants require water, light, and food, but the trick to success is to practice moderation. And I think we as humans are very, very similar. We need water. And we tend to overly complicate that. Like, does that mean water with a lot of sugar in it? Well, no, you know, water means water. Light, obviously we have to be careful, especially those of us that are fair and freckle. We have to exert some caution, but we do, you know, sunlight helps us make vitamin D. Usually we feel good if we get out and about a little bit during the day. And food, meaning nutrition, we need as well. Now, I would say we as humans also need some movement, which plants don't officially need, like we need it. But they have done some studies that plants that grow up like in a terrarium where there's no wind, they tend to not be as sturdy and as deeply rooted, but that buffeting by the wind actually helps them strengthen. That challenge helps us strengthen and helps us grow deeper roots. So I think humans, we're a lot like plants in some ways. All right. So if it's that simple, water, light, and food, and then movement for humans, how do we mess this up? Humans probably also need some human connection. Humans, we tend to be tribal, right? That's the way we have lived in families, in tribes, in small groups. So we probably need human connection too. But we mess this up really just by over complicating it. I said by getting too fancy, right? Let me bring the Q&A back. There we go. We mess this up by getting too fancy. So again, right, like water, kind of boring. What if we dump some sugar in the water and some flavor in the water and some color in the water? And again, a little bit of that here and there totally fine. But we've just taken it so far away from what we were evolved or created to do with, and what environment was really best for us, that we've messed it up by getting too fancy. Same with light, right? A lot of the challenges we have with sleep is due to indoor lighting. We used to be much more timed with the sun. We get the indoor lights, we get the blue light from our screens, messes up our circadian rhythms. So Michael Pollan, who is a food writer, did a big study. He's written a couple of books, but he did at least one big study into like, what does all the science say we should be eating? And his conclusion after a ton of research and interviews was that probably what's best for us is to eat food. And that would be as opposed to food products. So eat an apple versus applesauce with added sugar or apple juice. Eat as close to the actual food from nature as possible. And out of that food, he says mostly plants. Now, obviously, we need our protein, the vegans and the vegetarians. I think it's also B12 that they have to supplement if they don't have any animal products. But, you know, a lot of plants. The plants do so many things for us: vitamins, minerals, fiber, the little phytonutrients, probably things that science hasn't even figured out yet. So he says, eat food, mostly plants, not too much. Again, common sense, theoretically, at a high level. So let's go a little deeper. Next slide. All right. So this is where people get confused, right? I talked about getting confused about what does water mean. We also get confused about what food means. Not all edible things are what I would consider really food. I mentioned this a minute ago. Food is really what we evolved to eat. Plants and things that eat the plants, we want to try to keep it simple. Less packaged stuff, less processed stuff. Usually we end up happier and healthier. All right. So with that foundation, let's go into how do we lose weight. One of the things that I really recommend and that I did personally that helped support my weight loss was shifting from food products to food. And theoretically, that shouldn't be that hard. Again, at some level, we try to act confused, and I think sometimes we are confused. But if you think about it, we kind of know what food is. Food is stuff that grows on the dirt or in the dirt, right? That hasn't come out of a factory. It's usually not in a box or packaging, maybe shrink wrap if it's fresh. But shifting from food products back to food. So theoretically, that makes a lot of sense. But if somebody wants to implement that, there's usually a lot of drama. But I really love this, but I really need that, but I can't because of this, but I can't because of that. And that's where the coaching comes in and can be really helpful, is looking at that drama, taking it apart. And it's possible a percentage of it is real and true and unavoidable. It's just a circumstance. But a lot of it is just patterns that we're in, habits that we're in, kind of false beliefs we have that we can kind of take apart and we can shift. And as we do that, it becomes easier to make the change. Oh, there we go. All right. So makes sense. How does the vinegar help, though? This is what I said we would be talking about. When do we get to the vinegar? All right. So start with a little bit of background. And those of y'all that are clients have seen some of this, but always good to review. And I would say, if you know it, instead of thinking, yeah, I know it, take a look at like how good of a job am I doing at implementing it? And if I'm not implementing it and I want to, what's getting in the way? And those are great things to coach on as well, to bring to a session. So the idea behind Dr. Jason Fung's work, let me show you his book. And he's an interesting guy. He started as a kidney doctor and wanted to get at the root cause of why so many of his patients had kidney disease. And he found it was because a lot of them had diabetes. So then he's like, well, why do so many people have diabetes? What do I get when I back up from diabetes? And he got to obesity. So he's like, let's tackle the obesity. And his work shows, and he's a scientist, and there's a lot of great science, way more in depth than I am prepared or interested to go into. But for somebody that wants to deep dive on the science of what happens, He has it all in his book. And his whole argument, right? Again, if we go back to the food versus food products, if we're eating food, then we're going to have a spike in blood sugar and then a dip as we process that blood sugar out of our blood system. And then right on the heels of that spike in blood sugar, we will have a spike in insulin and then a dip in insulin. And that insulin is what is responsible for helping us store fat. So his argument is when blood sugar is high, insulin is high. And when insulin is high, we are in fat storage mode and we cannot burn the fat that's on our bodies for fuel. So again, if this is what happens when we eat food, what happens when we eat food products? Again, there tend to be very concentrated sources of sugar or concentrated sources of starch, which breaks down very quickly in our bodies into sugar. So we get this artificially high spike to the blood sugar, which if you think about diabetics, uncontrolled blood sugar is one of the things that can kill you if you have diabetes. So your body goes, oh no, this is not good. Let's bring the insulin in. So you get this huge spike in blood sugar, huge spike in insulin, and this becomes an emergency for your body. And if we're constantly eating, which is what most of us were trained to do in the 80s, right? Is that fat is the enemy. So eat a low fat diet. And as we strip out fat, we put more and more carbohydrates in, packaged foods, refined carbohydrates. And we were told to snack every 2 hours so we never get hungry, as if being hungry has anything to do with why a lot of us are eating a lot of the time. So basically, the advice we got in the 80s led to us constantly keeping our blood sugar high, constantly keeping our insulin high, which Dr. Fung in his research shows that keeps us constantly in fat storage mode. And we cannot burn the fat on our bodies for fuel when we are in fat storage mode. So what do? We have to get this down. Oop, lost my eraser. Here we go. So what we want to do is get back to these more natural food choices that our body knows how to deal with. So picking things that don't spike up our food, our blood sugar and our insulin super high, and then letting that come down by having breaks between our feedings, right? So we want to put space between our meals. And one of the ways he recommends doing that is intermittent fasting. Now, right, we don't want to tip this over into starvation, any kind of eating disorder. We don't want to go that far with it. But what I usually teach is just, if you're not hungry and you want to lose weight, maybe don't eat. And for a lot of people, intermittent fasting is a great way to do that. So a lot of people don't get hungry in the morning. And we've also been socialized that in order to lose weight, we need to eat breakfast. And I will say, your mileage may vary. If you find something works for you, then by all means do that. But at least for me personally, and a lot of other people that I've worked with, eating when you're not hungry because Kellogg's marketing says that's the time we need to eat so that they can make a profit doesn't make a lot of sense if we're trying to lose weight. So me personally, I generally don't have breakfast because I'm generally not hungry in the morning. So I'm not hungry. I want to lose weight. Let me not eat. And there are definitely exceptions. So, if I had a light dinner the night before, if I just, for whatever reason, maybe I got up extra early one morning, or maybe I worked out in the morning. If you are hungry, even if you do want to lose weight, eat, right? You can still practice this intermittent fasting while having breakfast by cutting out snacking, putting more space in your meals. You can start your fasting window earlier at night, right? So maybe you're getting up in the morning and having breakfast because reasons, and then you have lunch and then you have dinner, but then stopping after dinner. That can be a way to create that as well. All right, on to the new materials. There we go. All right. So this is the new stuff. I just found this book maybe a month ago. So if you have not read it, you might want to check it out. It's called Glucose Revolution. And the author, she has a big long name and she is French. So Jessie Inchauspe. Does that look right? Let you look at it in the camera. Hopefully you guys are seeing that and not just my slides. But you can always email me, lisa@lisaduke.net, if you need the author's name. But she's kind of an interesting chick. If you're on Instagram, you can follow her. And she publishes a lot of good little reels and interesting information. I'm going to pull up Instagram. I think she's just at Glucose Goddess, but I'm going to check to make sure. At Glucose. Yeah, just at Glucose Goddess. Again, if you can see, it's a little, there you go. If you can see my screen, that's her. You'll know when you found her. So really good information. And she's interesting because she had an accident. I think this was like early in her 20s after college, had an accident, had a physical health complication as a result of the accident. So she got really interested in how do we be healthy? And she, I think, went for an advanced degree, biochemistry, I want to say. It doesn't say on the back of the book. Or on the inside cover. Here, about the author. Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics from King's College, London, and a Master of Science degree in biochemistry from Georgetown University. And she went from there to 23andMe. If any of you guys have heard of the company, right? Because this was kind of, and I would say this still is sort of the prevailing narrative, is that our health is a result of our genes. So she got really interested in health, went back for this degree in biochemistry, went to work in 23andMe because the narrative at the time, and still pretty much today, was your health is determined by your genes. So if I'm interested in health, let me go learn about genes. And got into 23andMe, and genes are a thing. And there are certainly some things that are strongly 100% unavoidably genetic, but what she found, and what most of the science that I'm seeing that's coming out now seems to say, and what is kind of a shift from the narrative from, even 5 years ago, and maybe even what your doctor is saying, right? The doctor may still be saying, like the doctor said this to me just the other day, like my bad cholesterol was a little high, not so high that she wanted to prescribe me anything, but high enough that, I want to get the A+. So I'm like, how do we bring this down? And she said, well, it may just be genetic. Fair enough. It may just be genetic and there's nothing we can do about it. And eventually I'll need a prescription. But what if it's not genetic? What contributes to it? I knew saturated fat, right? Like animal products. So I try to limit how much of that I eat. Luckily, I'm lactose intolerant. So that makes going easy on the dairy very simple. But she said, yeah, it's the saturated fat from animal products and the tropical oils. And I, at the time, was having a lot of coconut. If you're on the MCT oil, that is tropical oil. If you're doing a lot of I was using, because again, the lactose intolerance, I was using a lot of coconut milk. So I'm like, well, let me reduce that and see when I go back if that has shifted my results. The other thing that I think can help, and we will find out when I go back for my blood work this fall, is losing weight. If you have a lot of you are an animal, right? So if your animal fat is high, it can be dietary, or it can just be what's in your bloodstream because of all these other things that we're talking about, right? So losing some weight, bringing down the fat, increasing the muscle, these are all things that we can do to shift that. Back to the Glucose Goddess. What she recommends, sorry, I got lost in the story and I don't have y'all real time to interact with me to point out when I've lost the plot, but she's at 23andMe. She thinks everything is genetic. They're finding that, one of the ways I heard it explained was that genetics load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. So we may be more genetically predisposed to certain things, but what determines whether or not that genetic tendency expresses and how early it expresses comes a lot down to lifestyle. So maybe somebody has a genetic tendency towards type 2 diabetes, but there's a huge difference in their quality of life if they develop that at 70 versus at 45. So if we're genetically predetermined to get it, what can we do in our lifestyle to delay it? So that's where she really got into, if it's not just the genetics, what are the lifestyle factors? What makes a difference? And while she was working at 23andMe, they had a trial of the continuous glucose monitors. You might have seen these. It usually is like a big plastic, like a white circle on the back of somebody's arm. It could be any number of things, but a lot of times that's a glucose monitor. So usually the people that have those, it's either because they have diabetes and they're trying to monitor that very closely, or they're just a fitness nut, right? So you see those people and it's usually one of two extremes. If they have that, they're usually either like super healthy looking or super unhealthy looking. Either way, probably, if that's what that is, it's probably because they're interested in their blood sugar. So she volunteered. They did a group that were trialing it, not because she had diabetes, but just to kind of play with it, see what results came up. And so she was one of the very early people to have a continuous glucose monitor. And she started noticing what caused and what reduced these blood sugar spikes, right? So we know from Jason Fung, high blood sugar, high insulin keeps you in fat storage mode. So if we can reduce the blood sugar spikes, presumably we're reducing the insulin spikes, and that lets us get better into fat burning mode. So she recommends a couple of things that I have here on the screen that you've probably already read, but one would be a savory breakfast. That if/when we do break our fast, right, whether that's at 11 with a salad or, at 6:30 with a bagel, it's breaking the fast. So when we do break our fast, she recommends savory versus sweet. Because if we have the sweets first thing in the day, it just kind of puts us on this roller coaster. Because our body did not really evolve to deal with the level of sugar and starch that's in processed food, sometimes it actually overcompensates and you get a crash, which is where I think this is where that hangry feeling comes from, right? Or the people who say, oh, I have low blood sugar, I need to eat every X amount of time. It's usually because we've spiked it up and we've thrown off our homeostasis and our body's just kind of like all messed up. And so we have the crash. So she says, at least first thing in the morning, if you can start out with a non-sweet breakfast, right? You're getting something like this. So you don't get in that cycle of the hangry and the low blood sugar and the cravings, right? If we're going to do this to ourselves, do it at the end of the day when we're on the way to bed instead of first thing in the morning. And that can set up the tone for the whole day. So if you're going to have breakfast, have something savory like eggs, right? Something with some protein in it versus the sugar of, a donut, or even the starch of anything that would be refined, processed. You want to try to avoid that, especially first thing in the morning. The other thing that she says, which I haven't seen published anyplace else, I think this is fairly unique to her, is she says to pay attention to the order in which we eat the foods that we eat. So she says to think of ourselves kind of like a sink. So let me stop the share just in case. I don't know if you all are seeing my show or not, but this is supposed to be a bathroom sink. And it's also supposed to be your stomach, right? So if we think about our stomach as kind of this pedestal sink, we want to start with, I took my green marker away. We want to start with the greens. Right? Start with the greens and then have your protein and your fat. And then if you're going to have sugar or starch, have that kind of on top. Because what that does is actually slows the trickle of the sugar. It comes through much slower versus if we do the exact same foods and we do the sugar or the starch first, then you get a lot more of a fast release into the bloodstream. So you want to try to slow the release of the sugar or starch into the bloodstream. Ways to do that: have your veggies first, then your protein and fat, then your carbs last. Oh, I see somebody else is in the Q&A. We can see you while you're in presentation mode. Thank you. First time with the new toy. All right, let me go back to sharing my screen. All right. What has happened? That's not what I wanted to do. Resume slideshow. There we go. All right. So she says, have your greens first, then your protein and fat, and then your starches last. And what's curious, sometimes, and I love it when this happens, sometimes the science kind of validates what we've done culturally. A lot of times it doesn't, but sometimes it does. And this is one of those instances. If you think about a fancy restaurant where they bring your food out in courses, right? First, you'll usually get your green salad. Second, you would get your fat and starch, right? So maybe your steak and your potato. And then if you're going to have dessert, that would traditionally have been served at the end. So I don't know if people just sort of intuitively figured out that they did better, felt better if they ate this way, or if it was just luck. But this is an easy cultural way to implement this. If you're going to a restaurant that serves the food this way, very, very easy to use that food order. But what if you're someplace where it all comes out on one plate? Right? So we've got our veggies, our protein, like our steak here, our potato here, and then actually, I guess technically the potato is a starch. Protein and fat. So let's make this like an avocado. I don't know that that's something people are eating, but protein and fat, right? So we'll make this fat. And then our starch on the side. So if it all comes on one plate, based on what she's saying, actually the best way for your body is to eat kind of the way I think about a toddler eating, right? Like they would probably eat, they might not do it in this order, but I always imagine toddlers kind of eat. I guess this is the way I ate when I was a kid, is I would kind of start with what was my favorite and I would want to eat all that instead of going around. And then it was just, for some reason, became the grown-up thing to do, to not eat all of one thing. But if you wanted to follow her advice and everything comes on your plate at the same time, and you can do this without feeling too weird, then she would say, you know, eat your broccoli first and then your steak and avocado if you've got it. I don't know, maybe this is some kind of Mexican dish. We'll have to figure that out. But then have your potato last, is what she would say. So again, I'm a big fan of doing things when they make sense and they're not too weird. I think on the next slide, I have some other ideas about how we can do this, but just kind of start looking for ways to do that. I'm not a big believer, like I said, in doing things to the point where it gets weird. So I went to a friend's house the Saturday for lunch and she served sandwiches, and you know, I wasn't going to be weird and like eat this. I could have eaten the slice of tomato first and then the meat and the cheese and then the bread, and it would have been fine, but I just didn't feel like doing that. So I didn't. But what I did do was I had a pickle first, which I'll get to that when we get to the vinegar. We are going to talk about that. Had a pickle first and then had my sandwich, which I would not historically have done. So looking for ways that we can fit this in where it makes sense and where it works. So that's the food order piece. The other thing she's a big fan of is putting clothes on your carbs. So she's a big fan of no naked carbs. So let's say you are going to have a bagel for breakfast, right? And we might think, oh, well, to save calories, I'll have it plain. What she would say is actually go ahead and put your you know, we've been doing fat in this color. So I guess the cream cheese would be your protein and fat. So go ahead and put your schmear. Maybe if you're doing, is it lox? Is that what we call salmon when it's on a bagel? Right? Let's make that a different shape. Make that a big square. Right? So she would say, actually put your protein and fat on there. Yes, it's more calories, but you're going to get that trickle effect of the sugar and the starch versus the big spike. So put close on your carbs. If you think about if you're, I don't know, Angela, out in Texas, if they have bagels now. They did not have them in Arkansas when I was a kid. At least not where I grew up. So if you're not doing bagels, right, we do toast. So same thing. A lot of times we think, oh, I'll have the dry toast to save calories. And yes, calories are a thing. But based on what she's teaching, you're actually better off with your avocado toast or even butter. Dun, dun, dun. Don't tell the people of the 80s. But even, right, a little bit, that looks a lot like a square bagel now. This is supposed to be the pat of butter, right? So even putting a little butter on the toast, digest a little slower, hit the bloodstream a little slower, less of a spike, much better for you. So put close on your carbs if and when you are going to have them. And then the last thing that she talks about is trying to get some movement in after your meals. And I will say this is not something that I personally have implemented, although I think it's a great idea. I'm not opposed to it. I just haven't worked it into my schedule. But she says and I actually have the notes written in the front of the book. Walk 10 minutes after a meal, or walk for 10 minutes after a meal. And what that actually does is help your body burn off some of the sugar that's in your stomach, in your blood system, and also in your muscles so that there's space for that to get taken up from the blood into the muscles. And it's interesting. I talked to one of my clients whose family is from India, and she said that it was her understanding that that's actually a part of Indian culture. I don't know if it's all parts of India, but she said at least for her family, that was part of the culture in India. And that she has an uncle that would go like walk up and down the alley after every meal. So again, sometimes these things sort of intuitively show up in culture, even maybe before we have the science to understand why. So that is something that you can look at implementing, trying to work into your lifestyle. I tell you what, it'll also stop you from overeating, because if you know you're going to go for a walk after a meal, you're not going to want to be all like bloaty and swishy. So it might actually help you eat a little less in terms of quantity as well, because you don't want that heaviness sitting in your stomach if you know you're going to go for a stroll. All right, vinegar. I told you we'd eventually get to it. So what's the deal with vinegar? She says vinegar temporarily inactivates the enzyme that changes starch to sugar. So the sugar is released more slowly. So this whole process, right, of our pedestal sink and putting the sugar into the pedestal sink, if you have a little vinegar in there, I'm out of colors, so we'll make this the vinegar. That having a little vinegar in there, actually think of it as like maybe a clog in the drain. It actually inactivates the enzyme that changes the starch into sugar, therefore slowing your digestion of the sugar, therefore slowing that release into the bloodstream of the sugar, therefore reducing the height of the spike. And again, all of this she learned really mostly using herself as a guinea pig, wearing that continuous glucose monitor. And then now she has her community. She's got an app, I believe. She's got other people that are tracking it. So this is stuff that she validates, works on other folks. The other thing, two other things. The second thing that the vinegar also does is that it actually encourages the muscles to uptake more sugar, which gets it out of the blood faster. So more of that muscle is storing more of the sugar, therefore less circulating in the blood, less that's a big an emergency to drive the insulin up. The other thing that she said is it tells the DNA to burn fat, which blows my mind. I don't know how that works. but it's in the book. So I feel like it's probably true. Again, this is Glucose Revolution is the book if you want to check it out. So, oh, we got another comment. Let's see what's going on. Very cool. All of the enzymes for different types of sugar. Oh, see, we can't fool Melody because she knows about science. So what, I actually wrote it in the front of the book so I can actually answer the, I think I wrote it in the front of the book. Oh, I did not. I think it was the amylase. Is that the one? And am I pronouncing it right? Yes. I think it's that one. Dun, da, da, da. Did I say which page? I did not write down the page number, but I believe that you're exactly right. That's the enzyme. Let's see. Did I write? I wrote page 73 for something else. Let me see if it's all right next to each other. Bum, bum. Eat foods in the right order. I will send it afterwards because I'm not finding it quickly, but I think you're right. Da, da, da. Here's one that nope, that's not it. I think you're right. Oh, we got another comment. Yes, amylase is in your mouth and stomach to break down simple carbs into glucose. So yes, she was saying that if I'm remembering correctly, it inactivates that enzyme. And so the sugar gets released more slowly. It does still eventually all make it there, but I'll find the page and I'll send it. I might even put it in the notes if I remember. But yeah, very cool. So then the question becomes, well, how do we get the vinegar without getting too weird? Again, you can get weird if you want, but I'm always trying to think about how do I do it without being too weird. So next slide. Obviously, back to the fancy restaurant, which is my solution to most problems in life. If you go to a fancy restaurant and you're going to get a 3-course meal, then you're going to get the salad instead of getting ranch, which is like the official dressing of America, oil and vinegar, right? That puts the vinegar right at the beginning of the meal with the green veggies. So it's there when your starches come in. And I think she said 20 minutes, no more than 20 minutes before, which might rush you a little bit at a fancy restaurant. But again, I think we get partial credit. So how you can do this without being weird, oil and vinegar on your salad. That puts the vinegar right at the beginning of the meal. What I did at my friend's house on Saturday, where I had decided, again, I could have been fussy and asked for greens and taken my sandwich stuff. And if she had greens, put them on a salad. But I was like, you know what? The occasional sandwich probably won't kill me. It'll be fine. So I'm going to eat the sandwich. And I wasn't going to pick it all apart and eat it in a weird order. But I will have a pickle beforehand, which I used to not do. I used to get so annoyed when they would serve pickles with sandwiches. I'm like, ew, what is this? Stinky. Try to get rid of it. But luckily they were, how much vinegar? I wrote down vinegar on salad, 1 tablespoon. Yeah. And I wrote it down someplace else in the cover of the book, 1 tablespoon of vinegar, which again, if you think about a green salad is probably about what you would want. A tablespoon of vinegar, 1 or 2 tablespoons of oil, and that gets it going. So the pickles, again, before the sandwich, if the pickles are pickled in vinegar, you're probably not getting a tablespoon, but you're getting some. The sauerkraut that we talked about the other day, Melody, I think that's pickled in vinegar. Let me know if not. Here's one. I think some of y'all know Mr. Lisa is English, and they put malt vinegar on their French fries, which I always thought was weird. But somebody somewhere somehow figured out, hey, these potato, and when I say potato chips, fish and chips, that means French fries. But same thing, right? French fries, they do have fat because they're cooked in fat, but it's a lot of starch. And for reasons I do not understand, they have a cultural tradition of putting malt vinegar on their French fries, which I would guess is effectively doing this. I wouldn't be surprised if in her community somebody has tested this, but my expectation would be that it probably does the same thing, right? Gives you a delay in all of that starch hitting your system. Sushi. I'm not an expert on sushi, but my understanding is if you make it the traditional way, you get day-old rice, you put vinegar. They have a special kind of rice vinegar that goes on the sushi rice, and then you roll it up and you serve it. So that would be something if you make your own sushi, but you're making it, without the rice vinegar. If you're able to throw that in, give that a try. That might be a way to get the vinegar in, again, without making it too weird. She does talk about having like vinegar in a glass of water before a meal. That's probably a bridge too far for me. But again, if you want more information, the book is a great source for that. And people usually, when that comes up, ask her about teeth because we have some concerns about vinegar and teeth. She says it shouldn't be an issue, especially if you're getting ready to eat a meal, but that if you're concerned, you can use a straw. So that's a little too weird for me, at least right now. Maybe future Lisa will want to give it a try. But right now, a salad, oil and vinegar, following my husband's example on the French fries, those kind of things seem very doable. Next slide, please. All right. And then this is the commercial. For those who are watching this, want some help, want some support. I will say I don't get too much into the food and nutrition. If I find something like this, I'm always happy to share it, but I'm not a nutritionist and I'm definitely not a dietitian. But what I can help with is I teach clients tools that they can use and that I use in sessions with them to help them make the changes that they're choosing. So if I had a client who said, oh, I really want to do this, but I have this limiting belief that I don't like vinegar. I would probably say pick something easier if you truly don't like vinegar. But if you've just never tried it, like I was with the pickles, right? I had a belief I don't like pickles. But now that I have this extra incentive to give it a try, and she had the fridge pickles, so not the ones that have gotten really mushy, but the ones that are basically cucumbers with vinegar flavor. I was like, I have this belief that I don't like pickles, but that's basically just a cucumber and I like cucumbers. Let me try it. And it was okay. So those are the kind of things where the coaching can really help us see our limiting beliefs that are getting in the way. If it's more of a negative emotions or a nervous system thing, the EFT tapping can be very, very helpful to work through the negative emotions, to calm the nervous system. So then we can get back into that prefrontal cortex, that smartest part of the brain, to make some of these decisions. And we get a lot more clever and a lot more resourceful when we're operating from that smartest part of the brain instead of being in fight or flight. The hacking reality kind of takes the EFT tapping a little further. We can go back to if there is a specific memory, a younger self that's holding a lot of negative feelings, a lot of energy, going in and helping that younger self work through. And I had this conversation with my husband the other day, so it's probably worth bringing up. When we go back to a younger self and work through the memory, we don't relive the awful thing that the younger self is trapped with. We go back to the incident where the younger self was, and we interact with that younger self and we allow the younger self. It sounds bonkers, but it's in your imagination, I believe, right? So we help the younger self kind of rework that scene. And by doing that, the younger self sort of starts to feel empowered of like, oh, right. So we're not changing the memory. The person still knows what happened, but it's almost a way of like integrating the memory. So it becomes a memory that you've just kind of made peace with, almost like a movie, right? It's real, but it's not actively bothering you. It's not getting triggered. And that just helps bring down kind of the overall level of drama when we don't have something that's constantly getting triggered. So that can be really helpful because again, for a lot of my clients, they're eating when they're not hungry because, and I was doing this, but it was totally subconscious. I had no awareness that I was doing this. I was not feeling good. And so I was eating to make myself feel better, but I didn't have the awareness even that I wasn't feeling good because I was answering the problem so fast that I never even really got an awareness over what the problem was. It was just, I had this drive to overeat. So if we can do things where people overall feel better, whether that's, helping that younger self, using the EFT, changing the mindset, when you're overall feeling better, you don't need the food to deal with the negative feelings as much. So it gives you a little space to kind of break out of some of those habits and some of those loops. I also teach clients a little, what I would call an introduction to somatic work. I'm not a somatic practitioner, but the Life Coach School, they do teach us what I would say is kind of a somatic technique called the Now technique, where you start to kind of notice what emotion you're feeling, teach you how to sit with that. So I do kind of an introduction to that. So that again becomes another skill. So when clients leave, yes, we have the work that we've done in the sessions, and hopefully they're also leaving with this understanding of, I have some choice over how I respond to this situation, and based on the thoughts that I'm choosing, that drives the feelings. So I can change things at the thought level, or if I don't want to, or I've kind of missed the window, I can deal with the negative feelings with the EFT tapping or just with sitting with them. And when I have more tools to use to change my emotions besides just food, then the food is not so attractive and driving so much behaviors. Hopefully that was interesting, useful,